some call me Apostle Joe, some call me Pastor Joe. But this is Joe Green, and I'm bringing you a contemporary commentary from a biblical perspective. A contemporary commentary from a biblical perspective. I was trying to think of how I want to describe what we're doing here. But we do this regularly, and I'm planning on doing it more frequently because I think it's so important for us to discuss the things that are happening, but look at it from the proper perspective. If you're not careful when you start to look at things and you look at it from a worldly perspective, then you will absolutely be misled. You will believe something that is true is not true, and vice versa. You will, as the Bible talks about, you will exchange good for evil and evil for good. You will call evil good and good evil. And so that's what we're seeing in popular culture when it's not looked at through the lens of a biblical worldview. Historically, biblically is what we try to look at things. So as you see in the title today, we're going to talk about Will Smith and Jada Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith. And I know most of you are probably familiar with what's happening. But for those of you who may not have been following along, over the last few years, it's been pretty obvious that there is an issue with Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith. But it has been portrayed as though it's something normal and something enlightening and something empowering and all these other things. And it absolutely isn't. I don't know what that is on string. So anyway, what we see here, and you guys all are familiar with the whole the slap thing at the Oscars when Chris Rock was doing a monologue, excuse me, and he made some very harmless jokes about Jada Pinkett Smith and her hair, and Will Smith got up and slapped her and said, keep my wife's name out of your blankety blank mouth, right? And he said it twice. He was really passionate when he said it, and Jada looked kind of surprised. When Chris first said the jokes, Jada just rolled her eyes. She really didn't react much. She just rolled her eyes. Will Smith was laughing originally, but then when he saw Jada Pinkett Smith roll her eyes, then that triggered him. He went up on stage and slapped Chris Rock, and the rest is history. And then when you look at all the backstory, there's so much more to this, which I thought was very interesting because, for one thing, recently, Jada Pinkett Smith has released a book, her memoirs about her personal life. And when she was being interviewed about it, she said the thing that surprised her the most out of that whole thing, not the fact that Will went up and slapped him in the face and all that other stuff, but the thing that surprised her the most was that he called her his wife. And I thought that was interesting. And the interviewer was asking her, well, why is that so curious? And she said, because we've been separated since 2015. We didn't get divorced, but we've been separated. And, throughout the past few years, Jada has revealed other stuff about their marriage. She revealed how when they got married, she was crying because she didn't really want to marry Will Smith. She was kind of pressured into it. She's repeatedly talked about her love for the late, great Tupac Shakur, who's been dead since like 1997. He's been dead like 27, 26 years, something like that. They were friends in high school and they were casual friends when he was alive. But somehow or another, after he died, she has made this into this great love story, that how much she loved him and they loved each other, even though while he was alive, they had the opportunity to be together and they weren't together for whatever reason. He had other women. He was engaged to Quincy Jones's daughter before he died. But somehow or another, this revisionist history that brings it like he was her soulmate. And that's, you can't even argue that fact because she said it repeatedly. And even to the point where her daughter wrote a love letter to Tupac, or not a love letter, wrote a letter to Tupac that was published. I guess Jada published it, or maybe Willow published it, and said, Tupac, I miss you. I wish you were here to make my mother happy. And, that is a big slap in the face because, for one thing, Willow is Will Smith's daughter. Will and Jada have been together for a long time, over 20 plus years. And for Will's daughter, who wasn't even alive when Tupac was murdered, for her to write that, it must be she's expressing what her mom has expressed to her. So really weird, bizarre stuff. But if you think about the dynamic of Will and Jada Smith and how many times she disrespects him, there was that infamous Red Table Talk, which was Jada Pinkett Smith's podcast, where she openly discussed how she had an affair with August Alsina. And August Alsina was her son Jaden's friend. and she met him. He was physically and emotionally in a really bad place. She came as though she was trying to help him heal, and she ended up having an affair with him. And I would say it was kind of predatory because she's her son's friend. He was a young person. He was vulnerable, but they made that public, right? And so now when Jada, in order to clean it up, says, well, we weren't even together, and then me and Will, we were separated, but yet they still had this relationship. And many people have reported that Jada and August were together in the same house where Will is, in the same house that they share. So just really bizarre. But of course, they have presented this in the media and in entertainment, in entertainment circles, as though somehow or another this is normal, this is empowering, this is enlightening. And so I'm saying this to come to what I'm really going to talk about today, which is this feminist spirit. Because if you look at the relationship or the dynamic with Will and Jada, and even it was interesting because not long ago, Will he came to support her for her book, signing or whatever, and he said, "I will support her for life." And even they made a joke about it when the relationship when she had with August Alsina, which she called an entanglement, not an affair, which was interesting words. Had never heard of that word before. But at the end of it, he says, "We ride together, we die together, bad marriage for life," which is an allusion to the Bad Boys series that he starred in. But it was just interesting. The whole dynamic is interesting. It's really bizarre because it's not normal and it's not healthy, but yet they are presenting it as though they are some kind of gurus or some kind of people that help other people, but they're very dysfunctional in their relationship. So you think about the dynamic between Will and Jada. She dominates him, right? So she has the masculine energy and he has the more feminine energy in their relationship. She humiliates him, and she really comes across with like this masculine, feminine energy. And because of that, what's the result of that? Their family's in turmoil. You know that growing up as minors, Jaden used to wear women's clothes, and Willow used to dress in mainly man's clothes. He's openly expressed that he is, I guess, bisexual or gay or whatever the case may be. They showed Willow in kind of compromising pictures as a very young girl with an older male. I think she was 13 and he was 21 or something like that. But just a lot of dysfunction, a lot of just perversion and twistedness in the whole family dynamic. And it's primarily because of not only the dysfunctional dynamic between the husband and the wife, but because they have presented this kind of twisted dystopian reality as though somehow or another it's normal. And everything that they have presented really goes against the scriptures. And so we're going to look at that from a scriptural basis. But first, I want to talk about that spirit behind it. Because, see, when you look at things that are occurring, you have to understand it from a deeper spiritual understanding and revelation. And what is happening in society more and more is you have this rise in the feminine spirit. Some people call it the divine feminine. And this is not a new spiritual dynamic. It is something that has gone back to ancient times. And what I would say to you, at the core of it is an anti-Christ, anti-God agenda, anti-family agenda that is very destructive. And if we don't understand it, then we can fall victim to it. So feminism goes back a long time, and I would say Genesis 3, and I'll explain why that is. But the spirit of feminism in ancient Rome, Plato talked about it. He talked about that as soon as they begin to be your equals, they will have become your superiors. That's what Marcus Procurius Cato argued. He was arguing against Plato because in Plato's Republic, the book Plato's Republic, if you had a chance to read it, it's a long read, but it tells you a lot about modern society. Plato advocated that women possess natural capacities equal to men for governing and defending ancient Greece. But there was a lot of pushback because you know that Greece was it was originally a very masculine society that became very effeminate. If you look in ancient Greece, which where the Olympics were actually started, during the time of the Olympics and right before the Roman Empire sucked up the Greek Empire, you had men that were very effeminate. It was a very sexual environment. You know, when they first started the Olympics, they actually would do it in the nude. The Spartans would wrestle half naked. And if you think about the whole Greco-Roman wrestling style, it originated from this time period where men are grappling around on each other. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with wrestling. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is originally it was very sexual and more sensual than we see it here today. And so you had that, that's the early feminist movement. But then in America you had what was called the first wave feminist movement and the suffrage movement. So in the suffrage movement, what you did, you had women that were fighting for the right to vote and be considered equal, because you know in America, in the early part of the 20th century and before that, women weren't able to hold certain jobs, they weren't able to own property and those type of things. And so you had this women's suffrage movement, which it was nothing wrong with that, because they were just asking to be treated fairly. And that's all that anyone should ever ask for. So if a woman goes out and earns a living and she gets a job and she earns money and she's able to buy a house, she has a right to. She should have the right to vote just like anybody else. She should have rights that she earns, you know, just like anybody else. She has those rights too. So that was beneficial for overall society, because you know before that, in many places in the world to this day, women are considered property or second-rate citizens. They're not considered to be something to be valued, but basically property. But when you understand the first wave feminist movement, what happened in that movement, but let me tell you what happens all the time. Here's what the enemy does. He's very clever. He takes a partial truth and a partial reality, and then he begins to twist it and pervert it for his benefit. And I'm going to explain that. But what I want to say to you is even sometimes when they talk about the matriarchal society, when you think about the biblical times and God's gender roles, it was never meant to to dehumanize women. It was actually both genders, both sexes had roles, and those roles were complementary to each other, and they were for the overall good and benefit of not only for family but society as a whole. So you think about this traditionally, if the man was the breadwinner, he went out and worked, and the woman stayed home and she managed the house and the family, right? And so why is that important? That's important because if a woman is having a baby, you know, she's carrying a baby. So during that time, she shouldn't be out here digging ditches and, you know, working in the steel mill or anything like that, right? She should be at home. When the children are young, she should be nurturing her child because she's bonding with the child, she's teaching the child, and those type of things. And so when the man is the protector and provider, right, doesn't mean women can't go out and do what she wants to do as well. But I'm saying that the core of that relationship and that dynamic is that the woman is the manager of the household. The man goes out, he's the one that builds the bridges and builds and digs the ditches, right? He's the one that goes out and fights the wars, unfortunately, when that has to occur. And then if we have the woman who is doing their roles, which are complementary to each other and necessary, right? So the Bible says that a man shall not be alone, because a man needs the woman and the woman needs the man as well, right? They're complementary. They are not, one is not better than the other. But when we look at things from God's perspective, then we have a more healthy and a more functional society and families as a whole. In the 19th, then you had the second wave feminist movement, and this is when it starts to get twisted a little bit. So the second wave feminist movement, which was in the 1960s and the 1970s, you had some lady by the name of Gloria Steinem, and you have to recognize that the second wave feminist movement, the core of it was based in Marxism, based in atheism, Satanism, and it was also, many people believe that the power structure actually promoted that to tear down the family unit, right? Because what the second wave feminist and the third and fourth wave feminist movement does is it just doesn't empower women, but it takes away the power from man. It destroys the patriarchy, right? Because they say that that's evil. They try to present that as evil, and what it begins to do is it begins to turn upside down God's order for the household and for the family. And we see the long-term effects of it. Like I mentioned with Will and Jada, you know, there's a lot of dysfunction in their family. And when you have unhealthy, dysfunctional families, it creates dysfunctional, unhealthy individuals, which creates a dysfunctional, unhealthy society as a whole. And we see a lot of the results of that here in the society, what's happening now, you know, with the violence, with all the crazy stuff that's occurring. I would say that part of that is the breakdown of the family unit, because that we have taken away the God's order for the household and the family and the purpose of the family. We've taken it out of context and we've twisted it around. And so the third wave feminist movement occurred, and the fourth wave feminist movement, which you have like the Me Too movement and different things like that. You have women that are fighting for equality, And let me tell you something too, that the part of when you talk about these movements, it's rooted and grounded, like I said, in Marxism, and it's part of what was known as critical theory, which was created by in the Frankfurt School in Germany, right? It was a think tank of Marxists that wanted to look at how they can take over society as a whole without any resistance or much resistance. And so they recognized that one of the things that hurt the Marxist movement the most was the Judeo-Christian Western culture, which certain institutions that Judeo-Christian, the Judeo-Christian Western culture had, that certain values made it difficult or impossible for them to take over society, because you had a bunch of strong individuals that weren't just going to cave in, right? And they knew that forcefully they couldn't come in and take over. So they came up with what they call the revolution without bloodshed, right? And so what happens is they come in and they do uh, a cultural takeover by reestablishing, taking certain institutions that we hold near and dear, like families, like gender roles, like sexuality, and all that other stuff. They attack all of them in order to reestablish, it's called deconstruction. So they deconstruct certain institutions, but they don't do it as a way to construct it a different way, but to keep them weakened so that the people can be weakened as well. So, and where's this come from? See, you got to realize that Satan is the author of all of these deconstructive things, right? So, all these institutions that we call Judeo Christian values and the Judeo Christian culture actually come from a biblical worldview or biblical foundation, right? So, God established gender roles, gender and sex roles in the household. He established the rules for sexuality. He established the fact that there's only male and female, right? That was the foundational principles that God established humanity on. And so when we follow what the creator has created, then we have prosperity and success. When we go against that, then we have you know destruction and death, right? And you have a lot of people, and I'm going to tell you, there's a rise in mental health, and people want to talk about mental health and being healthy mentally, but nobody wants to talk about the foundation that allows us to be healthy mentally. Strong family units help to create strong emotionally strong people. And so, but they want to, they go against that. But where does this start at? So there's a spirit that the Bible talks about in Revelation 7. It calls it Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of all harlots and the abominations of the earth, right? And it is it is described as a woman sitting on a beast, and she's wearing purple and scarlet, right? This is Revelation 17, Revelation 18. That's the system, the world system that occurs at the end when Jesus comes back again and he overthrows that system. So I need you to understand that it's not about bashing women, it's about bashing this feminist spirit. And the spirit of feminism, which the Bible calls Mystery Babylon, is one that was established early on. When was it established? It was established in Genesis chapter 3. So we know the story of Adam and Eve. God created Adam and Eve and gave them dominion over the earth and all these other things in Genesis 1. Then in Genesis 2, of course, he gives them Eve and he says, now this is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, right? And he puts the proper protocols in place for the family. And then what happens in Genesis 3, we know the serpent comes, he deceives Eve. He didn't deceive Adam. He deceived Eve, and she ate of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. She gave it to her husband, and then her husband ate of it, right? And so what happened was God comes and God rebukes first Adam. And why does he rebuke Adam first? Because Adam was supposed to be the authority in the household, the spiritual authority in the household. He was supposed to protect and cover his wife and lead her properly. But because he didn't, that's when the serpent came in and deceived Eve. And then death and destruction came. And what does he say to Adam? He says, Adam, because you heeded the voice of your wife and not the voice of God, the curse came, right? And he says to Eve, Eve, you desire to lead your husband or be over top of your husband, but he's supposed to be your head, right? He's supposed to rule over you. He's supposed to spiritually lead you and guide you, right? That's what God brought forth, because his order was that the male energy, or the man, was supposed to be the spiritual head. The woman was supposed to be the helpmeet, right? So God gives the vision to Adam, gives the word to Adam, and Eve is supposed to help to nurture that seed and bring it full circle. Now, think about this in the family. If you look at it from a spiritual point, but you also look at it in the natural reflects the spiritual. Because what happens? The man has the seed, right? God gives gives man the sperm or the seed. He plants it in the woman when they come together as one, as the Bible says, and then she procreates, right? They're procreating, which is promoting the agenda of the creator. And then what happens? The woman nurtures the seed that God gave to the man to give to her. She nurtures it and she brings it to its fullness, right? Its fullness blossom. And that's what you have to look at things from. Even if you look at the fact like a seed in the earth, right? The earth, if you look at certain philosophies like the five percenters, they call men gods and women earths, right? Because the woman is like the earth. The man plants the seed in the woman, she nurtures it, she's fertile soil, and then it comes full blossom. And that's what happens spiritually when the man is the visionary, listening to God, being led by God, and then there's a blossoming or fruitfulness in their family, in their children, and in society as a whole. Now let's look at where else do we see that order in? So we talked about Genesis chapter 3, and then you look in Galatians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5, the Apostle Paul reiterates what we've already seen that was established from the very beginning, right? It was already established in the very beginning. Paul just reiterates what was established in the beginning. So what does he say here in this Ephesians chapter 5? He says, verse 22, wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as also Christ is the head of the church, and he is the savior of the body. Therefore, just as the church is subject to Christ, so let wives be to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of the water by the word, that he might present to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle as in any such thing. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. So what is God doing? What is the word of God saying here? It's showing us the order of God, and it's not about lording over. It's not about one is not as important as the other. It's not about any of those type of things. It's just God's order. And a lot of people will buck against that, but we see in society what happens when we buck against that. We see about all the stuff that is occurring, and mostly because of the breakdown of the family unit, because God's order is not in place. And because God's order is not in place, because I think about Will and Jada Smith and how they are really presenting what we see in society, right? Because the man is not being the spiritual head of his household. The woman has emasculated him and has made him disrespected him. The children don't even know their roles, their gender roles, right? Jaden says all his clothes were women's dresses when he was growing up. Willow is very masculine. She has her head shaved and all that stuff. I haven't seen her lately, but that's what she presented before. And what's happening in society? The same thing. People don't know their roles. A man says he's a woman and a woman says that she's a man. And it's because of the breakdown of the family and going against God's order and his protocols. And so we have to be very careful of that, people. We are in a very dark space. I work in the urban areas, in the inner city. And if you look in the schools, it's very difficult for these children. Many of these children, I read a statistic, 85% of Black children are not reading or doing math. They're functionally illiterate. This is what the Department of Education NEAP statistics says, that 85% on average of Black children can't read. They're functionally illiterate in school, and can't do math. And so when you have a stronger family, you can have stronger individuals, and they can learn. It's easier to learn. That's a statistic. That's a fact. That the nuclear family is the best incubator for strong, healthy individuals who perform better. They succeed in life in most areas better. And this is not a knock on anybody who's in any other situation, me included. My mother and father got separated when I was very young. And so I didn't have my nuclear family together growing up. So I'm not bashing anybody. I'm just saying, what is God's order? Because this is how we rebuild society in a way that is healthy, fruitful, and is in God's image and his purpose and his plan. Because if we don't, then we will fall into the way of the Roman Empire, the Greeks, and all these other ancient civilizations that fell away. But again, until next time, this is Joe Green. Peace and blessings to you. Please share, subscribe to my channel, and like. If this is something that's beneficial to you, please share it. And I'd love to hear your comments as well. Shalom, shalom.